I dedicated 28 years of my life to my son, James. I worked double shifts at the hospital, gave up promotions that would have taken me away from home, nursed him through chronic asthma, paid for his college education, and even sold my family's lakeside cottage to help him start his business. I chose him over everything: my career, my dreams, even my marriage. But the day I told him I'd been laid off from the hospital after budget cuts, he looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You've always been financially irresponsible, Mom. I can't have you dragging us down too." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Within a week, he'd packed my belongings into cardboard boxes, calling me a financial liability, a burden he couldn't afford to carry. That was the moment I stopped being the sacrificial mother. I refused to be the woman who gave everything only to be discarded when I was no longer useful. I decided to stand up for myself, to reclaim my dignity. What James didn't realize was that my former patient, Mr. Abernathy, whom I'd cared for during his final months, had left me a substantial inheritance, $4.5 million and his historic brownstone in the city center. This time, I would make sure my son understood that betraying the hand that raised him would be the most costly mistake of his life. I had just returned from my final shift at Westlake Memorial when I broke the news to James. We were standing in the kitchen of the home I had helped him and his wife purchase. The mortgage was in their names, but the down payment, nearly $80,000, had come from my savings. I hadn't even finished explaining about the hospital's restructuring when James's expression changed. His face darkened, and he cut me off mid-sentence. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice rising with each word. "You're 56 years old and you just lost a job paying $75,000 a year? What exactly is your plan now?" The small joy I'd felt about finally having time to rest vanished instantly. I'd come home early, hoping to help with their new baby, my first grandchild. James and his wife Olivia had been talking about hiring a nanny, and I thought I could save them the expense while bonding with my grandson. "I thought I could help with baby Noah," I began, but James scoffed. "Help? Mom, you can barely help yourself. What we need is financial stability, not another dependent." His words cut through me like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devastating. I didn't immediately respond with anger. James had been under tremendous pressure since starting his consulting firm. His wife Olivia came from a wealthy family that never approved of him. Her father was the CEO of a regional bank, her mother a prominent attorney. They treated James like he was perpetually inadequate, and Olivia, following their example, constantly compared him to her more successful friends. Thought once they learned about Mr. Abernathy's inheritance, they might finally give James the respect he deserved. Perhaps they would stop looking down on our family. But I didn't mention the money, not yet. Instead, I brought up my other reason for coming home early. "I know you and Olivia are overwhelmed with the baby," I said. "I thought having me here full-time would be helpful. I could take night shifts with Noah, handle the cooking, give you both some space to focus on your careers." Olivia, who had been listening from the doorway, entered the kitchen with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Night shifts require consistency and training," she said coolly. "My mother has already arranged for a night nurse from the Swedish agency her friends use. They're certified in infant sleep training and early development techniques." Her mother, Regina, who seemed to be perpetually visiting, appeared behind her. "Taking care of an infant isn't just about changing diapers," she added with a thin smile. "It's a science now. The night nurse has specialized training in cognitive development and sleep patterns." The two women exchanged knowing glances, their synchronized condescension so practiced it was almost choreographed. I had been evaluated and found wanting, again. My decades of experience as a pediatric nurse meant nothing to them. To keep the peace, I forced a smile. "Well, if you have professionals coming, I won't get in the way. I'm sure they know what they're doing." Regina's lips curled into what passed for a smile in her repertoire of expressions. Exactly. But since you're unexpectedly available now, you can contribute to the cost of the childcare. We've selected the premium package. It's $3,800 monthly, plus benefits. I stood there, speechless, a knot forming in my chest. My son James immediately jumped in, supporting his mother-in-law without hesitation. That's perfect, he agreed, avoiding my eyes. Mom, now that you're not working at the hospital, you'll need to find something quickly. Our household expenses are about to increase significantly with the baby. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. They never wanted me to come home to help with the baby. They wanted a steady income stream to fund their lifestyle choices. I was nothing more than a financial resource to them, an ATM with a pulse. My face must have shown my disappointment because James's tone softened slightly. Look, Mom, it's not personal. It's just practical. We have a certain standard of living to maintain. Olivia's family has expectations. I'm 56, I said quietly. I was hoping to scale back, maybe work part-time. I've been on my feet for 12-hour shifts for almost 3 decades. Retirement? Olivia laughed, the sound brittle and cold. On what? You don't even have a proper 401k? Her words knocked the air from my lungs. I had wanted to contribute to a retirement fund years ago, but James's education expenses, then his wedding, then the down payment for their house had consumed my savings. Each time, James had assured me it was a temporary sacrifice, that once he was established, he would make sure I was taken care of. We discussed my retirement options, I reminded him. You said helping with your student loans and the house down payment was more important, that you'd help me later. Olivia tossed, her head, her blonde hair swinging like a curtain between us. Well, James had no business making promises he couldn't keep. The reality is, you should have planned better. No one forced you to drain your savings for us. James, now uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, raised his voice slightly. Enough, Mom. This isn't helping. We need solutions, not complaints. You're still young and capable. There's no reason you can't work another decade at least. Save the retirement talk for when you're 70. Another decade. The words echoed in my mind, hollow and disorienting. After everything I'd given, every sacrifice, every extra shift, every dream deferred, I was still just a workhorse to them, expected to carry their financial burdens until my body gave out. That's when I truly understood what was happening. All their talk about family and appreciation had been nothing but empty words designed to keep me working, keep me giving, keep me sacrificing. I looked at my son, this person I had raised and loved with every fiber of my being, and for the first time I saw him clearly. I saw the calculation behind his concern, the selfishness beneath his practicality. I steadied my breathing, pulled my shoulders back, and looked him directly in the eye. I'll find my own solution, I said, my voice low but firm. But just so, we're clear, I won't be contributing to your childcare costs. Not now, not ever. The uncomfortable silence that followed my declaration hung in the air like a storm cloud. Regina was the first to break it, her practiced smile never reaching her eyes. Well, she said, drawing out the word as if it contained multiple syllables, I think we all need to be realistic about our situations. There's always assisted living for those who can't support themselves independently. James shifted uncomfortably, but didn't contradict his mother-in-law. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing. There's a place called Sunset Gardens about 20 minutes from here, he said without looking up. They have a work-stay program for residents. You could help in the cafeteria or with custodial services to offset your living costs. I stared at my son, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Was this really happening? Was my own child researching low-income senior housing while I stood right there? I'm 56, not 86, I said quietly. And I've just lost my job, not my faculties. I don't need to be put in a home. Olivia sighed dramatically. No one's putting you in a home, Patricia. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We're trying to help you find sustainable solutions. The hospital isn't going to rehire you, and healthcare is moving toward younger staff anyway. You need to be practical. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. They never wanted me to come home to help with the baby. They wanted a steady income stream to fund their lifestyle choices. I was nothing more than a financial resource to them, an ATM with a pulse. My face must have shown my disappointment because James's tone softened slightly. Look, Mom, it's not personal. It's just practical. We have a certain standard of living to maintain. Olivia's family has expectations. I'm 56, I said quietly. I was hoping to scale back, maybe work part-time. I've been on my feet for 12-hour shifts for almost 3 decades. Retirement? Olivia laughed, the sound brittle and cold. On what? You don't even have a proper 401k. Her words knocked the air from my lungs. I had wanted to contribute to a retirement fund years ago, but James's education expenses, then his wedding, then the down payment for their house had consumed my savings. Each time, James had assured me it was a temporary sacrifice, that once he was established, he would make sure I was taken care of. We discussed my retirement options, I reminded him. You said helping with your student loans and the house down payment was more important, that you'd help me later. Olivia tossed her head, her blonde hair swinging like a curtain between us. Well, James had no business making promises he couldn't keep. The reality is, you should have planned better. No one forced you to drain your savings for us. James, now uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, raised his voice slightly. Enough, Mom. This isn't helping. We need solutions, not complaints. You're still young and capable. There's no reason you can't work another decade at least. Save the retirement talk for when you're 70. Another decade. The words echoed in my mind, hollow and disorienting. After everything I'd given, every sacrifice, every extra shift, every dream deferred, I was still just a workhorse to them, expected to carry their financial burdens until my body gave out. That's when I truly understood what was happening. All their talk about family and appreciation had been nothing but empty words designed to keep me working, keep me giving, keep me sacrificing. I looked at my son, this person I had raised and loved with every fiber of my being, and for the first time I saw him clearly. I saw the calculation behind his concern, the selfishness beneath his practicality. I steadied my breathing, pulled my shoulders back, and looked him directly in the eye. I'll find my own solution, I said, my voice low but firm. But just so we're clear, I won't be contributing to your childcare costs. Not now, not ever. The uncomfortable silence that followed my declaration hung in the air like a storm cloud. Regina was the first to break it, her practiced smile never reaching her eyes. Well, she said, drawing out the word as if it contained multiple syllables, I think we all need to be realistic about our situations. There's always assisted living for those who can't support themselves independently. James shifted uncomfortably, but didn't contradict his mother-in-law. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing. There's a place called Sunset Gardens about 20 minutes from here, he said without looking up. They have a work-stay program for residents. You could help in the cafeteria or with custodial services to offset your living costs. I stared at my son, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Was this really happening? Was my own child researching low-income senior housing while I stood right there? I'm 56, not 86, I said quietly. And I've just lost my job, not my faculties. I don't need to be put in a home. Olivia sighed dramatically. No one's putting you in a home, Patricia. We're trying to help you find sustainable solutions. The hospital isn't going to rehire you, and healthcare is moving toward younger staff anyway. You need to be practical. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the counter to steady myself. I had always known Olivia was cold, but this level of callousness was breathtaking. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that I had options they couldn't imagine. 10 months ago, I had been assigned to care for Harold Abernathy, an elderly patient with congestive heart failure. Harold was a widower with no children, a retired history professor who had invested wisely throughout his life. During the 3 months I cared for him, we developed a genuine friendship. I read to him when his eyesight began to fail, brought him homemade soup when hospital food became too difficult to swallow, and sat with him during countless lonely nights when pain kept him awake. The day before he passed, Harold had his lawyer visit. I was asked to step out of the room, but 2 weeks after his funeral, I received a letter from that same attorney. Harold had left me his entire estate, a historic brownstone in Oakwood Heights, valued at nearly $2 million, plus investment accounts worth another $2.5 million. He had written a note explaining that my kindness had given him dignity in his final days, something his money couldn't buy, but could perhaps repay. The inheritance had been finalized just 3 weeks ago. I hadn't told anyone, not even James. I planned to surprise him by offering to invest in his struggling business, to help him stand equal to Olivia's family. Now, as I watched him scrolling through affordable senior housing options, I was profoundly grateful for my silence. "I don't need your help finding housing," I said, my voice stronger now. "I've made my own arrangements." James finally looked up, his expression skeptical. "What arrangements? Where are you planning to go with no income?" I chose my words carefully. "I have savings, James, and friends. I won't be homeless, I assure you." "Savings?" Olivia scoffed. "You gave everything to James for his education and our house. What could you possibly have saved?" I didn't answer directly. I'd worked too hard for too long to justify myself to someone who had never known struggle. Instead, I turned to my son. "James, do you remember when you were 11 and developed severe asthma?" He nodded hesitantly, clearly confused by the change in topic. "The specialist said you needed a treatment regimen that our insurance wouldn't cover. Do you remember what I did?" He shifted uncomfortably. "You worked extra shifts." I worked 3 jobs for 2 years. I cleaned offices at night after my hospital shifts. I took weekend nursing gigs at the retirement community. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes in my car between shifts, because the medications cost $100-200 a month. I paused, letting the information sink in. "When you wanted to attend Westmore University instead of accepting the scholarship to state, do you remember what I did?" His eyes darted away. "You sold Grandma's cottage. The cottage that had been in our family for 3 generations, the only thing of value I owned. I sold it for $175,000 below market value because we needed the money quickly for your first semester's tuition." Regina made a dismissive sound. "Ancient history. Everyone makes sacrifices for their children. That doesn't entitle you to indefinite support." I turned to her slowly. "When your daughter married my son, they couldn't afford the wedding she wanted. Do you remember who paid for the difference between your contribution and the final cost?" Regina's perfectly lined lips thinned further. "You chose to do that. Nobody forced you." "Exactly. I chose to help every single time because that's what family does. Or at least, that's what I thought family does." I looked at each of them in turn. Regina with her barely concealed contempt, Olivia with her impatient indifference, and finally, James, my son, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. In that moment, the years seemed to fall away, and I saw him as a small boy again, his face flushed with fever, his little hand clutching mine as he struggled to breathe through an asthma attack. I had held him through countless nights like that, promising that I would always protect him, always be there. I had kept my promise. He had broken his. A baby's cry from upstairs punctuated the silence. Olivia immediately headed for the stairs. "I need to check on Noah. We can continue this productivity discussion later when he's settled. James stood up too. Mom, we're just trying to be practical. Nobody's throwing you out immediately, but we need to have a plan. You can stay in the guest room for now, but we need to figure out something sustainable within the next few weeks. I nodded, suddenly bone-tired. I understand. I'll make arrangements. As they left the kitchen, I remained standing by the counter, my hand still resting on its cool marble surface. Marble I had helped pay for when they renovated last year. The house around me, filled with furniture and appliances I had helped select and purchase, suddenly felt alien and unwelcoming. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years. Martin Brewster, Harold's attorney. It was time to claim my inheritance and reshape my future, a future that, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, would prioritize my needs above all others. That evening, I sat alone in the guest room, a space decorated with Olivia's discarded furniture and rarely used except when Regina's friends visited from out of town. The walls were a sterile beige, the bedding utilitarian and unwelcoming. Even the lamp on the nightstand had a broken switch that required jiggling to function properly. It was a room designed for temporary occupants, not family. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. James entered without waiting for my response, carrying a folder of papers. He sat on the edge of the bed, his posture rigid with discomfort. "I've been looking at some options," he began, opening the folder. "There's a senior apartment complex that has vacancies. It's subsidized, so the rent would be based on your income. Or there's a roommate matching service for people over 50. You could share costs with someone in a similar situation." I looked. At my son, really looked at him. His expensive haircut, the designer watch on his wrist, a gift from Olivia's parents, the subtle scent of cologne that probably cost more than a week of groceries. When had he become this person who could so casually research discount housing for his mother? "James," I said quietly, "do you remember your wedding day? When Olivia's parents insisted on the venue change 2 weeks before, and the new place required an additional $15,000 deposit?" He glanced up, the memory clearly uncomfortable. "You helped with that. I know, and I'm grateful." "I didn't just help. I withdrew the entire amount from my retirement account. I paid a penalty for early withdrawal, plus taxes. That money was meant to support me in my old age." James shifted, defensive now. "And I've always planned to pay you back, once the business takes off." "That was 3 years ago," I interrupted. "Your business is established now. You and Olivia took a vacation to Bali last summer. You bought a new SUV at Christmas. Where exactly does repaying me fall on your priority list?" His face flushed. "That's not fair. We have expenses, image to maintain with clients. The car is practically a business necessity. And we've been saving for Noah's college fund since before he was born." "So your unborn child's education was a priority, but your mother's retirement wasn't?" James stood abruptly, the papers slipping from the folder. "This isn't productive. You're upset about losing your job, and you're lashing out. I understand, but getting emotional won't solve anything." "I'm not being emotional, James. I'm stating facts. Facts that seem to make you uncomfortable." He began gathering the scattered papers, his movements stiff with anger. "Look, I know you've helped us, but parents are supposed to help their children. That's the natural order of things. You chose to have me. You chose to make sacrifices. I didn't ask for any of it." The words hung in the air between us, shocking in their callousness. An unexpected laugh escaped me, hollow and bitter. "The natural order of things," I repeated. "And what happens in this natural order when parents grow older? When they need support? Does the obligation only flow in one direction?" James straightened, clutching the folder like a shield. "Of course not. But there's a difference between support and dependence. We have our own family to think about now. Noah is our priority." "Just as you were mine," I said softly. for 28 years. And now uncomfortable silence stretched between us. From downstairs, I could hear Olivia talking on the phone, her voice rising and falling in animated conversation, completely disconnected from the emotional confrontation happening above. "I'll figure something out," I finally said, too tired to continue the circular argument. "I always do." James nodded, relief evident in his posture. "That's all we're asking. Just something sustainable. Something that doesn't impact our household." As he turned to leave, a final thought occurred to me. "James, the house we're standing in. Who paid the down payment?" He paused at the door, his back to me. "You contributed. We've always acknowledged that." "Contributed? I gave you $80,000. That's not a contribution. That's the entire down payment. Without it, you wouldn't have qualified for the mortgage." He turned slowly, his expression guarded. "What's your point?" "My point is that this house exists because of me. The deed may be in your and Olivia's names, but my life savings are literally in these walls. Remember that before you start researching homeless shelters for your mother." His face darkened. "No one mentioned homeless shelters. You're being dramatic." "Am I? Your mother-in-law suggested I scrub cafeteria floors to earn my keep in assisted living. How is that substantially different?" James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. It was the same movement he'd made, as a teenager when frustrated with homework, as a college student struggling with finals, as a young man facing job rejections. For a moment, I saw a flash of the boy I had raised, uncertain, vulnerable, trying to find his footing in a world that rarely offered second chances. But then his expression hardened again, and the moment passed. "We're done discussing this tonight," he said firmly. "You have 2 weeks to figure out your next steps. That's more than generous." After he left, I sat motionless on the bed, listening to the sounds of the house, the distant murmur of the television, Olivia's laughter at something. On her phone, the occasional soft cry from baby Noah, quickly soothed by the professional night nurse upstairs. All the trappings of family life, yet I had never felt more alone. I pulled out my phone and dialed Martin Brewster's number. "Patricia," he answered warmly. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Have you made a decision about the brownstone?" "Yes," I said, my resolve strengthening with each word. "I'd like to move in as soon as possible, and I'd like to discuss the investment accounts as well. It's time I took control of my future." The next morning, I woke early. The house was still quiet, the professional night nurse likely dozing in the rocking chair beside Noah's crib. I dressed quickly, packing essential items into a single suitcase. The fewer belongings I took, the less it would feel like the departure it truly was. Martin had arranged to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. As I quietly descended the stairs, I heard movement in the kitchen. James was already awake, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails on his tablet. He looked up, surprised to see me dressed and carrying luggage. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I have some appointments today," I replied, matching his detachment. "I thought I'd get an early start." He glanced at my suitcase, then back to his tablet. "You're moving out? Just like that?" "You made it clear I have. 2 weeks. I'm using that time to make arrangements." He set down his coffee, looking genuinely perplexed. "I didn't expect you to leave immediately. Where are you even going?" "I have a place to stay." "With who? One of your nurse friends?" "Mom, be reasonable. You need a sustainable plan, not a temporary crash pad." I smiled faintly at his concern, not for my well-being, but for the possibility that my crash pad would fail, and I'd return to burden them again. "My arrangements are more permanent than you might think," I said. "Don't worry, I won't be coming back to disrupt your household." Something in my tone must have caught his attention because he stood up, studying me more carefully. "What does that mean? What kind of arrangements could you possibly have made overnight?" I considered telling him everything right then. About Harold, about the inheritance, about the brownstone waiting for me. The words were on the tip of my tongue. But then I remembered his clinical discussion of subsidized senior housing, Regina's suggestion that I work as a janitor to earn my keep, Olivia's dismissive laughter at the notion of my retirement. It means I've taken care of myself, I said, instead. Just as I always have. James frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my answer but unwilling to press further. This was the pattern we'd established years ago. His discomfort with emotional confrontation, my tendency to smooth over conflict to spare his feelings. But this time, I wouldn't be the one to break the silence. At least tell me where you're going, he finally said. In case of emergency. I'll text you my address once I'm settled. And James? Don't worry about picking up my hospital severance check when it arrives. I've already arranged for direct deposit. Before he could respond, I wheeled my suitcase toward the door. As I reached for the handle, Olivia appeared at the top of the stairs, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, already dressed in designer loungewear. You're leaving? She called down, her surprise evident. James, what's happening? James shrugged, already turning back to his tablet. Mom's made arrangements, he said, air quoting the word. Apparently she has a place to stay. Olivia descended the stairs quickly, her expression a mix of suspicion and relief. What kind of place? You haven't signed anything without consulting us, have you? Some of those independent living contracts are predatory. I appreciate your concern, I said, the irony thick in my voice. But my financial decisions are my own. Financial? Decisions require financial resources, she countered, which, no offense, you currently lack. I opened the front door, letting in a rush of cool morning air. Goodbye, Olivia. Please give Noah a kiss from his grandmother. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, muffling Olivia's continued questions to James. I loaded my suitcase into my car, a sensible sedan with nearly 200,000 miles on it, and drove away from the house my money had helped purchase, from the family that had come to see me as nothing more than a financial liability. 30 minutes later, I sat across from Martin Brewster at Westside Coffee, a small cafe far from James and Olivia's upscale neighborhood. Martin was in his 60s, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to guiding clients through major life transitions. The brownstone is ready, he said, sliding a set of keys across the table. The property management company has maintained it beautifully. The utilities are on, and the cleaning service came through yesterday. Thank you, Martin. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your efficiency. He smiled warmly. Harold would be pleased to know his home is going to someone who will appreciate it. Now about the financial accounts. He opened a leather portfolio containing several documents. The transfer of assets is complete. Your name is now on all accounts. The total value as of yesterday's close was $4,578,342. I stared at the number, still unable to fully comprehend that it belonged to me. After decades of stretching every dollar, of calculating whether I could afford both gas and groceries in the same week, of denying myself small luxuries to pay. For James's needs, I now had more money than I could spend in my lifetime. The investment portfolio is quite conservative, Martin continued. Treasury bonds, blue-chip stocks, municipal funds. It generates approximately $180,000 annually in dividends and interest. Harold was very clear that he wanted you to have financial security, not just assets. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. Harold had known about my struggles as a single mother, about my financial sacrifices for James. During our long night conversations, I'd shared stories of working overtime to pay for soccer camps, of postponing home repairs to cover college application fees. He'd listened with genuine interest, never judging, only asking thoughtful questions about my life. There's something else, Martin said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Harold left this for you. He asked that I give it to you once you were settled. In the brownstone, but given the circumstances, I think now is appropriate. I took the envelope, Harold's neat handwriting spelling my name across the front. I would read it later, in private, when I could fully absorb whatever final message he had left for me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Martin said with a gentle smile, "you live the life you deserve, the life Harold wanted for you, without financial worry, without having to justify your worth, without having to sacrifice your needs for others who don't appreciate the gift." He gathered his papers, tucking them back into his portfolio. The brownstone is in the historic district. It's a beautiful neighborhood, quiet but within walking distance of shops and restaurants. I think you'll be very happy there. As we stood to leave, Martin paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Patricia, may I offer one piece of personal advice?" I nodded, curious. "Don't tell your son about the inheritance. Not yet. Give yourself time to adjust to your new circumstances, to establish boundaries. In my experience, sudden wealth can complicate already strained relationships. I thought of James and Olivia, of their casual cruelty, of their dismissal of my lifetime of sacrifice. I thought of Regina's suggestion that I work as a cafeteria cleaner. I thought of the night nurse upstairs, paid thousands of dollars monthly while my offer to help with my own grandson had been rejected as inadequate. "I think that's very wise advice," I said. "Thank you." As I drove toward my new home, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. The grief was for the relationship I had thought I had with my son, for the gratitude I had expected but never received, for the respect I had earned but been denied. The liberation was for my future, a future suddenly wide open with possibilities I had never dared to imagine. The brownstone appeared at the end of the tree-lined street, its red brick facade warm in the morning light. 3 stories tall, with elegant bay windows and a small, well-tended front garden, it was the kind of home I had only admired from a distance, never believing I could own something so beautiful. I parked at the curb, taking a moment to absorb the reality that this place, this lovely, valuable piece of history, now belonged to me. As I climbed the front steps with my single suitcase, my phone buzzed with a text from James. "Where are you staying? Need your new address for our records?" I smiled faintly, pocketing the phone without responding. He would learn my address soon enough. But first, I would enjoy the sweet privacy of my newfound independence. The brownstone welcomed me like an old friend. High ceilings with intricate crown molding, hardwood floors that gleamed with years of careful maintenance, and built-in bookshelves filled with Harold's extensive collection. I moved through the rooms slowly, taking in the elegant furnishings, the artwork, the subtle touches that reflected Harold's refined taste and academic background. The master bedroom suite was on the 2nd floor, overlooking a small but meticulously maintained garden. The king-sized bed was made up with expensive linens, the ensuite bathroom featured marble countertops and a clawfoot tub. It was luxurious in a way I had never experienced, not ostentatious like Olivia's designer showroom of a home, but genuinely comfortable and carefully curated. In the study, I found Harold's desk. A leather-bound journal sat in the center, a note attached. "For Patricia, my thoughts on legacy." I set it aside to read later, along with his letter. First, I needed to settle in, to process the dramatic shift in my circumstances. I unpacked my few belongings, hanging my modest wardrobe in the massive walk-in closet that had once held Harold's tailored suits and academic robes. My things looked almost comically out of place. Faded scrubs next to empty spaces where bespoke clothing had hung, worn sneakers beside the polished dress shoes still lined up on the shoe rack. After a simple lunch prepared in the gourmet kitchen, I sat in Harold's study with a cup of tea and finally opened his letter. "Dear Patricia, if you're reading this, then you've accepted my gift and are hopefully settling into your new home. I want you to know that this decision was not made lightly or on impulse. During our time together, I observed in you a quality that has become increasingly rare in our world: genuine selflessness without expectation of reward. You shared stories of your son, of the sacrifices you made for his future, always with pride rather than resentment. You spoke of your nursing career with the same dedication that I approached my academic work, as a vocation rather than merely employment. I have no children of my own, as you know. My late wife and I chose a different path, focusing on our respective careers and the students whose lives we hope to influence. While I don't regret this choice, I've often wondered in my final years who would carry forward what I valued, what I built. In you, I found my answer. Not because we share blood or name, but because we share values. You understand, as few do, that true wealth is measured not in possessions but in how we care for others, in the dignity we help preserve, in the comfort we provide. Use these resources as you see fit. Travel if you wish, pursue education or interests long deferred, rest if you need. But most importantly, recognize that this is not a gift given in pity or charity, but in profound respect for the life you have lived and the person you are. My only request is that you find joy. After decades of putting others first, allow yourself to be the priority. You've earned that right many times over. With deepest gratitude for your care and friendship, Harold Abernathy. I set the letter down, tears blurring my vision. Harold had seen me, truly seen me, in a way my own family had failed to do. He had recognized my worth not in what I could provide or contribute, but in who I was as a person. The contrast with James's casual dismissal, with Olivia's contempt, with Regina's calculation of my utility, was stark and painful. How had strangers like Harold valued me more than my own flesh and blood? My phone buzzed again with another text from James. "Mom, this isn't funny. We need your address. What if there's an emergency with Noah?" I stared at the message, the manipulation so transparent it was almost laughable. An emergency with Noah, the grandson they had deemed me unqualified to care for, the child whose professional night nurse cost more monthly than my car payments. Now, suddenly, I was needed in case of crisis? The pattern was clear. I would be kept at arm's length until I was useful, then expected to drop everything and rush to their aid. It was the same dynamic that had defined our relationship for years. My needs subordinate to theirs, my time and resources available on demand with nothing offered in return. I set the phone aside without responding. James wasn't worried about Noah. He was worried about control. My silence, my independence, represented a shift in power he hadn't anticipated and clearly didn't welcome. As evening approached, I explored the rest of the brownstone, eventually settling in the third floor, sunroom with its wall of windows overlooking the city. Lights twinkled in the gathering dusk, a carpet of stars laid out before me. It was peaceful in a way my life hadn't been for decades. No demands, no expectations, no calculations of what I could sacrifice next. My phone rang, breaking the silence. James again. After 4 unanswered texts, he had escalated to calling. With a sigh, I answered. "Hello, James." "Finally." His voice was sharp with irritation. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering my texts?" "I'm at my new home. I've been settling in." "New home? What are you talking about? Did you sign a lease? Somewhere? Please tell me you didn't get scammed into some predatory arrangement." His immediate assumption that I'd been victimized or made a poor decision was telling. In his mind, I was incapable of managing my affairs without his oversight. "My living situation is secure," I said calmly. "You don't need to worry." "Of course I need to worry. You just lost your job, you have minimal savings, and you're making impulsive decisions without consulting anyone. Just tell me the address, and I'll come check the place out." I could hear the control in his voice, the assumption that he had the right to approve or disapprove of my choices. It was the same tone he used when speaking to contractors or service providers, authoritative, slightly condescending, brooking no argument. James, I'm a grown woman who has been managing my own life since before you were born. I don't need your inspection or approval. This isn't about approval. It's about making sure you're not getting taken advantage of. You're vulnerable right now, emotionally and financially. Am I? That's interesting, considering yesterday you seemed quite confident I was capable of starting a new career at 56. Capable enough to contribute thousands to your childcare expenses. His sigh was audible, exasperated. That's different. We're family. We're looking out for your best interests. No, James, you're looking out for your interests. There's a significant difference. Why are you being so difficult? All I'm asking for is an address. I paused, considering my next words carefully. This was a pivotal moment, a chance to establish new boundaries that would define our relationship moving forward. I'll make you a deal, I said finally. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks of space to adjust to my new circumstances, to process the changes in my life. After that, I'll share my address and even invite you to visit if you wish. 2 weeks? Mom, that's exactly the time frame you gave me to figure out my next steps, I reminded him. Consider it a mutual cooling-off period. The line went quiet for a moment. I could almost see him weighing his options, calculating whether pushing would yield results or only strengthen my resolve. Fine, he conceded reluctantly. 2 weeks. But if there's an emergency, you have my phone number, I said. I'm not disappearing, James. I'm just creating some healthy distance. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the gathering darkness, thinking about Harold's letter, about James's demands, about the stark contrast between being valued and being used. A strategic decision was forming in my mind, not a vindictive plan for revenge, but a thoughtful approach to reclaiming my dignity and reshaping relationships that had become fundamentally unbalanced. I would use these 2 weeks to transform myself outwardly, as thoroughly as my circumstances had changed inwardly. New wardrobe, new hairstyle, perhaps even a cosmetic procedure or two that I'd always been curious about but could never afford. I would consult with financial advisors about managing my inheritance. I would learn about the neighborhood, establish myself as a homeowner with means and standing. And when the 2 weeks were up, I would reveal my new home and circumstances. To James, not with bitter triumph, but with the quiet confidence of a woman who finally understood her own worth. The following morning, I began my transformation in earnest. First stop, Meridian Bank, where Harold had kept his accounts. Martin had arranged a meeting with Thomas Chen, the private client manager who had handled Harold's finances for years. As I entered the imposing marble lobby, I was acutely aware of my appearance. My practical bob haircut hadn't been updated in years. My clothes, sensible slacks and a button-down blouse from a department store sale rack, were chosen for durability rather than style. Even my purse, a faux leather tote that had survived countless hospital shifts, screamed practicality over presentation. The receptionist's gaze lingered a beat too long on my worn shoes before directing me to the elevators with practiced politeness. I didn't blame her. I looked like I belonged in the regular customer service line, not heading to the executive floor for private banking. Thomas Chen greeted me warmly, however, showing no trace of the judgment I'd anticipated. He was perhaps in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed, but with a genuinely kind smile that put me immediately at ease. Mrs. Davis, it's a pleasure to meet you. Martin speaks very highly of you, as did Mr. Abernathy during his lifetime. We settled. In his office, an elegant space with views of the city skyline. Thomas reviewed the accounts with me, explaining investment strategies and options in clear, accessible terms. Mr. Abernathy's portfolio is conservative but well-diversified, he explained. It's structured to provide stable income while preserving capital. You could comfortably withdraw $180,000 annually without touching the principal. The figure was staggering, more than double my nursing salary. I would never again need to worry about basic necessities, let alone small luxuries. What would you recommend for someone in my position? I asked. Thomas considered the question thoughtfully. That depends entirely on your goals, Mrs. Davis. Are you looking to grow the principal for future generations? Maximize current income? Support charitable causes? All of that, perhaps, I replied. But first, I'd like to update my personal situation. New wardrobe, some home furnishings, perhaps a reliable car. Nothing extravagant, but quality items that will last. He nodded approvingly. That's entirely reasonable. I'd suggest setting aside perhaps $50,000 for those immediate needs. We can establish a separate account for your day-to-day expenses, with a debit card and checkbook for convenience. By the time our meeting concluded, I had a comprehensive financial plan, a new platinum credit card with a $100,000 limit, and the private bank's concierge service contact information. Thomas also connected me with several professionals, an estate planning attorney, a CPA, and a personal shopper at Neiman Marcus who specialized in wardrobe building for executives. Mr. Abernathy always spoke of you with great respect, Thomas said as we shook hands. He would be pleased to see you embracing this new chapter. My next stop was the personal shopping appointment Thomas had arranged. I'd never shopped at Neiman Marcus in my life. The store had always been so intimidating that I'd never even browsed there. But Alessandra, the personal shopper, welcomed me like an old friend and immediately put me at ease. Thomas mentioned, "You're updating your wardrobe completely," she said, leading me to a private suite. "Let's start with some basics and build from there." 4 hours later, I emerged with an entirely new wardrobe. Elegant daywear, casual but sophisticated weekend clothes, evening options, and accessories that transformed each look. Alessandra had guided me toward classic pieces rather than trendy items, focusing on quality fabrics and impeccable fit. The total was more than I'd spent on clothing in the past decade. But as Thomas had assured me, it was a reasonable investment in my new life. My transformation continued with a visit to Verlaine, an exclusive salon recommended by Alessandra. Maurice, the owner, studied me thoughtfully before speaking. "Your bone structure is exquisite," he said, circling me with a professional eye. "But this haircut is doing you no favors. May I suggest something that frames your face more elegantly, and perhaps some subtle color to brighten your complexion?" 2 hours later, I hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. My practical bob had been replaced by a sophisticated layered cut that somehow made me look 10 years younger. The subtle highlights added dimension to my previously monotone brown hair, and the styling made me look like someone who belonged in the lifestyle magazines I'd only ever flipped through in waiting rooms. Over the next few days, I continued my methodical transformation. A discreet cosmetic dermatologist performed non-invasive procedures that softened the lines around my eyes and mouth, not eliminating the evidence of my life experience, but refreshing my appearance in a way that reflected my inner renewal. A skilled makeup artist gave me a tutorial in enhancing my features subtly, then helped me select products that were simple enough for daily use. A week into my 2-week cooling-off period with James, I was sitting in Harold's study. Now my study, reviewing some investment documents when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Westlake Memorial HR. "Hello, Patricia speaking. Mrs. Davis, this is Diane from Human Resources. I'm calling about your severance package. There seems to be some confusion about the direct deposit information we have on file." "Oh? What seems to be the problem?" "Well, we processed the payment as requested, but it appears there was an issue with the routing number. The payment was rejected by the receiving bank." I frowned. My severance wasn't substantial, approximately $12,000, but it was rightfully mine, and I had confirmed the direct deposit information before leaving. "That's strange. The account information should be correct. I've been using that account for years." There was a brief pause on the line. According to our records, you requested a change of account for the deposit last Tuesday. The form was submitted with your signature. Last Tuesday, the day after I'd left James and Olivia's house. A suspicion began to form in my mind. Could you tell me which bank the funds were directed to? First National, account ending in 4872. My stomach tightened. That was James and Olivia's joint account, an account I had never been authorized to use. Someone had forged my signature to redirect my severance pay. Diane, I never authorized that change. That account doesn't belong to me. I see. Her voice became more formal, concerned. Mrs. Davis, this is a serious matter. Would you like us to investigate potential fraud? I considered my options carefully. Reporting the fraud would involve police reports, possibly criminal charges if it could be proven that James or Olivia had forged my signature. It would create a permanent rift, one that might never heal. Yet allowing the deception to stand would signal that I could still be taken advantage of, that my boundaries could be violated without consequence. Yes, I said finally. I'd like to report this as fraud. I never authorized my severance to be deposited into that account. I'll need to transfer you to our security department. They'll take your statement and initiate an investigation. We take these matters very seriously, Mrs. Davis. As I waited for the transfer, I felt strangely calm. This was not about revenge or punishment. It was about establishing consequences for unacceptable behavior, about refusing to be a victim any longer. The security officer was professional and thorough, taking my statement and explaining the next steps. The bank would be notified, the account frozen pending investigation. If evidence of forgery was found, the case would be referred to the police. Is there anyone who might have had access to your personal information? The officer asked. Someone who might know enough details to complete the form convincingly. Yes, I replied steadily. My son, James Davis. He's an authorized contact on my HR file in case of emergency. After completing the report, I sat quietly in the study, processing what had just occurred. James, or perhaps Olivia, had attempted to steal my severance pay, likely assuming I wouldn't notice or wouldn't challenge them if I did. It was a betrayal deeper than their harsh words or dismissive attitudes. It was theft, pure and simple. My phone rang again. James. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. Moments later, a text appeared. Mom, we need to talk right now. The bank just called about suspicious activity on our account. This is insane. Call me immediately. I set the phone down, a sad smile playing at my lips. My first countermove had been made, not as I had planned through careful transformation, but through something more fundamental, standing up for myself, refusing to be exploited, and demanding basic respect. James would be angry, defensive, perhaps even threatening. But for the first time in our relationship, I held the power. Not just the power of financial independence, but the moral authority of someone who had been wronged and refused to accept it quietly. My phone didn't stop ringing for the next hour. James called repeatedly, each missed call followed by increasingly frantic text messages. Mom, pick up now. The bank has frozen our account. We can't access our own money. This is some kind of mistake. You need to fix this immediately. Olivia is freaking out. We have bills due. Finally, when I didn't respond, the tone changed dramatically. Whatever you think happened, you're making a huge mistake. I'm coming to find you. That last message gave me pause. James didn't know my address, but he was resourceful and determined. In his current state, I wouldn't put it past him to start calling hospitals, hotels, or even my former colleagues to track me down. I decided to address the situation head-on, but on my terms. I texted back a single line. I'll meet you at Rosemont. Cafe at 2 p.m. Come alone. Rosemont was an upscale coffee shop in the financial district, public enough to discourage a scene but quiet enough for a private conversation. I arrived early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. I had dressed carefully in one of my new outfits, a tailored navy dress with subtle gold accessories, my hair freshly styled, makeup flawless but understated. I wanted to project confidence and self-possession, not flash or ostentation. James burst through the door at exactly 2 p.m., his eyes scanning the room frantically until they landed on me. For a moment, he seemed not to recognize me, his gaze passing over, then returning with a double take. He strode toward my table, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, dropping into the chair opposite me without a greeting. "The bank says someone reported fraud on our account. They've frozen everything." I regarded him calmly, noticing the beads of sweat on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hands. "Hello, James. Would you like some coffee before we talk?" "Coffee? Are you serious? Our account is frozen. Olivia's in tears. We can't pay the night nurse, the gardener, our mortgage. Nothing." "That's quite a predicament," I agreed, my tone even. "Similar to suddenly losing your job and being told you have 2 weeks to find new housing." His eyes narrowed as he finally registered my appearance, the expensive dress, the sophisticated hairstyle, the subtle but unmistakable transformation in my demeanor. "What happened to you?" he asked, momentarily distracted from his financial crisis. "You look different." "I am different, James. Many things have changed in the past week." "Well, whatever midlife crisis you're having, it needs to wait. Someone reported fraud on our account, specifically related to a deposit from Westlake. Memorial, your severance check." His voice lowered, accusatory. "Did you do this?" I took a sip of my tea before responding. "The hospital called me yesterday. They said someone changed my direct deposit information without my authorization, redirecting my severance pay to an account ending in 4872. Your joint account with Olivia." James's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Of course I did. You left without any warning, without telling us where you were going. I was worried the money would bounce if your account was closed. I was trying to protect your interests. By forging my signature? By taking money that belongs to me without my knowledge or consent? I was going to tell you. I just needed to make sure the funds were secure first." "Secure for whom, James? For me? Or for you and Olivia?" He leaned back, his expression hardening. "I can't believe you're treating me like a criminal. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me," I repeated slowly. "Please, elaborate. What exactly have you done for me recently?" "We gave you a place to stay when you needed it, for less than a week, and you made it abundantly clear it was a temporary arrangement at best. We were trying to help you be realistic. Mom, you lost your job. You have limited options. We were trying to guide you toward sustainable solutions. Solutions that conveniently required me to keep working and contributing financially to your household, regardless of my own needs or wishes." James ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Look, this isn't productive. The issue right now is our frozen account. You need to call the bank and tell them this was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, James. It was fraud. You forged my signature to redirect funds that legally belong to me." "I'm your son. I was trying to help." "Help yourself to my money," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." His face flushed darker, anger replacing the initial shock. "So this is punishment? Some kind of revenge because we asked you to contribute to the household? To pull your own weight? What happened to you, Mom? When did you become so selfish?" The accusation might have wounded me a week ago. Now it merely confirmed what I already knew. James saw my entire worth in terms of what I could provide, what I could contribute, what I could sacrifice. My needs, my dignity, my right to self-determination were irrelevant. This isn't about punishment, James. It's about boundaries. My severance pay belongs to me. You had no right to take it, regardless of your intentions. "Fine," he snapped. Keep your precious severance, but you need to unfreeze our account. We have bills due, responsibilities. The account will be unfrozen. Once the investigation is complete, the bank will return my severance to me, and if they determine no other fraud has occurred, your account will be restored. Investigation? Mom, do you have any idea what you're doing? This could take weeks. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? I considered him thoughtfully. Perhaps Regina could help. She seems quite invested in your financial decisions. His jaw tightened at the mention of his mother-in-law. This isn't a joke. Olivia is beside herself. The night nurse is threatening to quit if she's not paid today. Noah has a checkup with the pediatric specialist tomorrow, and now our health insurance card is declined because the automatic payment didn't process. For a moment, maternal instinct nearly overcame my resolve. My grandson's health care was at stake, after all. But then I remembered that James and Olivia had explicitly rejected my offer to help with Noah's care, had deemed me unqualified despite my decades of pediatric nursing experience. They had made their choice about my role in their lives. I'm sorry about the difficulties this is causing, I said sincerely, but the situation is a direct result of your actions, not mine. I didn't create this problem, James. So you're just going to leave us hanging? Your own family? Your grandson? I'm going to allow the proper authorities to resolve the situation you created. The bank will complete their investigation, determine what happened, and proceed accordingly. And in the meantime? What are we supposed to do? I reached into my purse and withdrew my checkbook, not the worn one from my old bank, but the new one with the prominent private bank logo in the corner. I wrote a check for $2,000, signed it, and slid it across the table. This should cover your immediate essentials until the situation is resolved. James stared at the check, then at the checkbook, his eyes widening slightly at the bank name. One of the most exclusive financial institutions in the city. Where did you get this? He asked, suspicious. Since when do you bank with Meridian? My financial arrangements are my own business, James. Just as yours are yours. He picked up the check, examining it as if it might be counterfeit. Is this even real? Do you actually have $2,000 to give away? Where are you getting this kind of money? The check is valid, I assured him. Whether you choose to cash it is up to you. He pocketed the check, but his expression remained troubled, calculating. Something's not right. You disappear for a week, show up looking like this. He gestured at my transformed appearance. Suddenly banking at Meridian, throwing around thousands of dollars? What's going on, Mom? I told you, James. My circumstances have changed. Changed? How? Did you win the lottery or something? Are you dating someone wealthy? The implication stung, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm not dating anyone, and my financial situation is private. His eyes narrowed further. This isn't like you? The secrecy, the new look, reporting your own son to the bank for fraud. What happened to the mom who would do anything for her family? She realized that anything had become a one-way street, that her sacrifices weren't appreciated or respected. So, now what? You're punishing us? Teaching us some kind of lesson? No, James. I'm simply living my life on my own terms for the first time in decades. He studied me for a long moment, his anger gradually shifting to something like wariness. Where are you living? I want to see this place you've mysteriously acquired. That wasn't part of our agreement. You have my check. You know I'm safe and well. That's enough for now. James stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with more force than necessary. Fine. Keep your secrets. But don't think this is over. Olivia's father is on the board at First National. Once I tell him what you've done, what I've done, you mean reporting a genuine case of fraud? By all means, involve Regina's husband. I'm sure the bank board will be fascinated to learn that one of their director's relatives attempted to divert funds without authorization. His face paled again. You wouldn't. I'm not threatening anything, James. I'm simply pointing out reality. Actions have consequences. I didn't create this situation. You did. He stared at me for a long moment, confusion and anger warring in his expression. I don't even know who you are anymore, he said finally. I smiled softly. That's because you never really knew me, James. You knew the mother who sacrificed everything for you. You never bothered to know the woman behind that role. He turned and strode out of the cafe without another word, shoulders rigid with indignation. Through the window, I watched him reach his car, slam the door, and sit motionless behind the wheel for several minutes before finally driving away. The confrontation had gone largely as I'd expected. James's anger, his disbelief, his inability to recognize his own culpability. But what surprised me was my own reaction. Instead of guilt or doubt, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The emotional hold he had maintained over me for so long had loosened its grip. I wasn't detached from caring about him. I still loved my son deeply. But I no longer felt responsible for managing his emotions or solving his problems, especially problems of his own making. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but not an unwelcome one. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone chimed with a text notification, not from James as I expected, but from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Davis, this is Olivia. We need to talk. Privately. I stared at Olivia's text for a long moment. In the 3 years since she had married James, we had never once communicated, directly without him present. Our relationship had been cordial at best, strained at worst, with Olivia clearly viewing me as someone to be tolerated rather than embraced as family. What could she possibly want to discuss privately? My instinct was to ignore the message entirely, but curiosity won out. I texted back, I'm not interested in being a mediator between you and James. Her response came immediately. This isn't about James. It's about Noah. Please, it's important. Noah, my 8-month-old grandson. Despite my complicated feelings toward his parents, I loved that child with a fierceness that surprised me. His innocent face had been the backdrop of my thoughts throughout this entire difficult week. Fine. Where and when? Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Gardenia Tea Room. The Gardenia was an exclusive establishment in the historic district, known for its elaborate afternoon teas and strict dress code. It was precisely the kind of place Olivia would choose, expensive, formal, and designed to intimidate. In my former life, I would have felt hopelessly out of place there, conscious of my practical clothing and limited budget. Now, however, I had the wardrobe, the confidence, and most importantly, the means to meet Olivia on her own turf. I confirmed the appointment without hesitation. The next morning, I arrived at the Gardenia precisely at 10 a.m., dressed in a silk blouse and tailored trousers that Alessandra had assured me were perfect for upscale daytime events. The maitre d' escorted me to a private alcove where Olivia was already seated, Noah in an expensive-looking carrier beside her. She looked up as I approached, her expression shifting rapidly from composed expectation to barely concealed shock. Like James, she seemed momentarily unable to reconcile my transformed appearance with her mental image of me. Patricia, she greeted me, recovering quickly. Thank you for coming. Hello, Olivia. I bent down to stroke Noah's soft cheek. And hello to you, sweet boy. Noah gurgled happily, reaching for my finger with his chubby hand. Whatever tension existed between his mother and me, he was blissfully unaware of it. A server appeared to take our orders. Olivia requested the full tea service with champagne. I opted for simple Earl Grey. After the server departed, an awkward silence descended. You look different, Olivia finally said, her gaze assessing. Yes, so I've been told. Is this part of some sort of reinvention after losing your job? I smiled faintly. Something like that. She fidgeted with her napkin, clearly uncomfortable with my non-specific answers. Olivia was accustomed to controlling conversations, to knowing more than those around her. My newfound reticence was clearly unsettling. "James told me about your meeting yesterday," she said finally. "About the bank situation." I assumed he would. "He's very upset." I imagined so. Another silence stretched between us, broken only by Noah's occasional happy babbling. Olivia seemed to be waiting for me to apologize, to explain myself, to fill the uncomfortable void with justifications. I remained silent, sipping my tea. "Look," she said finally, her composure cracking slightly. "I didn't ask you here to rehash that situation. I need to talk to you about something else. Something important." "I'm listening." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "Noah's pediatric specialist called yesterday. The tests they ran last month. The results aren't good." My heart stuttered in my chest, maternal instinct overriding all other considerations. "What tests? What's wrong with him?" "He has a congenital heart condition, similar to what James had as a child." I froze, teacup halfway to my lips. "What James had as a child?" Olivia's brow furrowed. "Yes, the mitral valve defect. The doctor said it often runs in families, which is why we had Noah tested early." My mind raced. James had never had a heart condition. He'd been a perfectly healthy child apart from his asthma, which was environmental, not congenital. Why would Olivia think he had a heart defect? "Olivia," I said carefully, "James didn't have a congenital heart condition." She stared at me blankly. "Of course he did. He told me all about it. The surgeries when he was 3 and 5. The medications throughout elementary school. How you worked extra shifts to pay for the specialists." Each word was like a physical blow. James had created an elaborate fiction about his childhood, not just exaggerating or embellishing, but fabricating serious medical conditions that had never existed. "James was hospitalized for severe asthma several times," I said slowly. "He had bronchial issues until he was about 10, but there was never a heart defect, never any surgeries." Olivia's face drained of color. "That's not possible." He described the procedures in detail. "He has a scar on his chest that he said was from the second surgery. That scar is from a bicycle accident when he was 12. He crashed into a fence and a metal piece punctured his chest. It required stitches, not cardiac surgery." She shook her head in disbelief. "No, that can't be right. He told my parents about his childhood health struggles when they questioned his family medical history before our wedding. My father even contacted a specialist friend to discuss the long-term prognosis. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. James had invented a dramatic medical history to gain sympathy from Olivia's judgmental family, to explain his modest upbringing and my career choices. He had used my sacrifices as a single mother, real sacrifices made for ordinary needs like education and housing, and twisted them into a fictitious narrative of heroic struggles against life-threatening illness. "Olivia," I said gently, "I was a pediatric nurse for nearly 30 years. If James had a congenital heart defect requiring multiple surgeries, don't you think I would remember that?" She stared at me, her perfectly composed facade crumbling. "He lied? About something that serious?" "It appears so." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "But why would he—" She stopped abruptly, reality dawning. "Noah. He knew there was a chance Noah might have a heart condition from his side of the family. He invented a medical history to cover it up. Is that possible? Is there a history of heart problems in James's biological family?" The moment the words left my mouth, I realized my mistake. Olivia's expression shifted from shock to confusion. "Biological family? What are you talking about? Aren't you his biological mother?" The room seemed to tilt slightly. In all the emotional turmoil of the past week, it had never occurred to me That James might have kept this fundamental truth from his wife. That he might never have told her he was adopted. "Olivia," I said carefully, "did James ever tell you that he was adopted?" She stared at me, her eyes widening with each passing second. "Adopted? No, never. That's not possible. I adopted James when he was 13 months old. He was born with a congenital heart defect, not a mitral valve issue, but a ventricular septal defect. His biological parents abandoned him at the hospital shortly after his diagnosis." Olivia's face had gone completely white. No, that can't be true. He would have told me. We did genetic counseling before trying to get pregnant. He submitted family medical history forms. Forms that he falsified, apparently. She closed her eyes briefly, processing this new, devastating information. So, Noah's condition may well have been inherited from James's biological family. Yes, the genetic link is real, just not in the way you thought. Noah began to fuss in his carrier, perhaps sensing the tension. Olivia mechanically reached out to rock him, her movements stiff with shock. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would he hide something like that? Why lie about his own origins, his own medical history, even when it could affect our child's health?" I sighed deeply. James has always been sensitive about his adoption. When he was younger, he struggled with feelings of abandonment, with questions about why his biological parents didn't want him. As he grew older, those insecurities manifested in different ways, like inventing dramatic stories about childhood. Illnesses? Pretending his adoptive mother was actually his biological mother? Apparently. Olivia looked down at Noah, who had settled again, his big eyes, so like James's, looking up at her trustingly. "Our entire marriage is based on lies," she said flatly. "I don't think that's entirely fair. James lied about his origins, yes, and that's serious. But that doesn't invalidate your relationship or your family." She looked up at me, her expression hardening. "Doesn't it? What else has he lied about? If he could fabricate his entire childhood, medical history, what else is fiction? Our finances, his business prospects?" I had no answer for her. The James I thought I knew, the son I had raised with love and sacrifice, seemed increasingly like a stranger to me, too. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" Olivia asked, genuine confusion in her voice. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed vulnerable, young, uncertain. "I can't tell you that, Olivia, but I can tell you everything I know about James's biological family medical history. It might help Noah's doctors develop the right treatment plan." She nodded slowly, maternal concern temporarily overriding her personal shock. Yes, that would be important." She paused, then looked at me directly. "Does James know you're telling me this?" "No. I assumed he had told you years ago. He's going to be furious when he finds out." "Probably," I agreed. But the truth about his adoption was never mine alone to keep. It was his story to share or withhold. The medical history, though, that affects Noah. That's something his doctors need to know. Olivia stared into her teacup for a long moment, then looked up with unexpected directness. "There's something else. Something I need to know." She took a deep breath. "Where are you getting your money? The new clothes, the exclusive bank, the sudden financial independence? It doesn't make sense. Are you in some kind of trouble? Something illegal?" Despite everything, I almost laughed. The idea that I, a lifetime rule follower who had never so much as jaywalked, might be involved in criminal activity was absurd. But Olivia's question was serious, her concern apparently genuine. "No, Olivia, nothing illegal. I've come into some money recently, but it's all perfectly legitimate." "How much money? From where?" I considered how much to reveal. Olivia was still processing the bombshell about James's adoption. Adding the full scope of my inheritance might be too much for one conversation. Yet something in her expression, a combination of genuine worry and newfound vulnerability, made me reconsider. I recently inherited a substantial sum from a former patient, someone I cared for during his final months. Her eyebrows rose skeptically. A patient left you enough money to transform your entire life in a week? That seems unusual. It was an unusual situation. Harold Abernathy was a retired professor with no family. We developed a friendship during his illness. He left me his estate when he passed. And how much is this estate worth exactly? I met her gaze steadily. Approximately $4.5 million, plus a historic brownstone in the Garden District. Olivia's teacup clattered against its saucer as her hand trembled in shock. $4.1 million? Yes. And you were going to tell us this when exactly? After we forced you into assisted living? After James emptied our savings trying to support both households? I had planned to tell James once I was settled, to offer financial support for Noah, perhaps investment in his business. But that was before I discovered how little both of you thought of me. Before I was told I wasn't qualified to care for my own grandson. Before James attempted to steal my severance pay. She had the grace to look ashamed, at least momentarily. Things have been said in the heat of the moment, by all of us. Some things once said can't be unsaid, Olivia. She looked down at Noah again, her expression softening. What happens now? With all of this? It was a good question, one I hadn't fully resolved myself. The unexpected revelation about James's lies complicated an already complex situation. His deception about his medical history wasn't just a personal fiction. It had potentially endangered his son's health. Yet beneath my anger and disappointment, I still loved him. He was still the boy I had raised, regardless of his adult choices. I don't know, I admitted finally. But whatever happens between James and me, Noah shouldn't suffer for it. I'd like to be part of his life, if you're willing. Olivia nodded slowly, her usual confident demeanor subdued by the morning's revelations. I think that would be good. For Noah. She hesitated, then added, and perhaps for all of us. The revelations at the Gardenia tea room left me profoundly unsettled. On the drive back to the brownstone, I found myself replaying conversations with James over the years, searching for clues I might have missed, indicators of the elaborate fictions he had been constructing. Had there been signs that James was not merely embellishing but fabricating entire aspects of his life? Had my determined focus on his success and happiness blinded me to fundamental flaws in his character? As I pulled into the brownstone's driveway, my phone rang. The hospital's fraud investigation team, calling to update me on the severance payment situation. The bank had confirmed the unauthorized transfer, had retrieved the funds, and would be redepositing them into my account. They also informed me that they had sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges if I wished. No, I said immediately. I don't want to press charges. I just wanted my money returned. Are you certain, Mrs. Davis? The evidence of forgery is quite clear. I'm certain. Please consider the matter closed once my funds are returned. After ending the call, I sat in the car for several minutes, thinking about what Olivia had revealed. James's lies weren't just about his adoption, that I could perhaps understand, given his lifelong struggle with feelings of abandonment. But fabricating a detailed medical history, even when it might affect his own child's health care? That level of deception suggested something deeper, more troubling. Inside the brownstone, I went straight to Harold's study, my study now, and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a folder containing James's adoption records, medical history, and the few documents I had related to his biological parents. The hospital had provided basic information. His birth mother was 19, unmarried, a college student who had hidden her pregnancy from family and friends. His birth father was 22, a graduate student who had ended the relationship when informed of the pregnancy. When James was diagnosed with the ventricular septal defect shortly after birth, his mother had surrendered him to the hospital, unable or unwilling to cope with a chronically ill child. I had always been honest with James about his adoption, introducing the concept gently when he was around 4, answering his questions as they arose throughout childhood. I had been careful to frame his biological parents' decision with compassion rather than judgment, emphasizing how much I had wanted him, how choosing him had been the greatest joy of my life. As he entered adolescence, his questions had become more pointed, his emotions more complex. Why hadn't they wanted him? Was there something wrong with him? What kind of mother abandons her baby? I had tried to help him process these feelings, but perhaps I had failed him in ways I hadn't recognized. My reflections were interrupted by the doorbell. Startled, I wasn't expecting any visitors. I made my way to the front entrance, checking the security monitor on my way. James stood on the porch, his posture tense, his expression unreadable. I opened the door cautiously. "James, this is unexpected," he didn't wait for an invitation, brushing past me into the foyer. "So this is where you've been hiding. Nice place." His tone was bitter, accusatory. Definitely not the subsidized senior housing you supposedly needed. "I never said I needed subsidized housing. That was your suggestion." He ignored this, moving further into the house, taking in the soaring ceilings, the elegant furnishings, the obvious quality and value of my new home. "Olivia told me about your little tea party, about how you dropped your bombshell about my adoption, trying to turn her against me. So that's why he was here. Not to apologize for the severance check fraud, not to make amends, but to confront me about revealing his secrets. I didn't drop a bombshell, James. I thought she knew. You've been married for 3 years. I assumed you would have shared something so fundamental about yourself with your wife." He paced the entryway, agitated. "It wasn't your story to tell." "No, it was yours, and you chose to lie instead." He whirled to face me, eyes flashing. "I didn't lie. I just didn't see the point in dredging up ancient history that doesn't matter anymore." "Doesn't matter? You invented a fictional childhood heart condition, James. You falsified medical history forms that doctors are using to treat your son." "I didn't invent anything. I had health problems as a kid." "Yes, asthma. Not cardiac surgery. Not the specific condition you described to Olivia's family." He waved this away dismissively. "It was simpler that way. Olivia's father is obsessed with genetic pedigrees, with family medical histories. If I'd told him I was adopted, that I had no idea what genetic time bombs might be lurking in my DNA, he never would have approved the marriage. So instead, you created a fiction that could potentially harm Noah? The doctors need accurate information to treat him properly, James." At the mention of Noah, something shifted in his expression. A flash of genuine fear, quickly masked by defensive anger. "Don't pretend this is about Noah's health. You told Olivia about the adoption to punish me." "No, James. I told her because she told me Noah has a congenital heart defect, one she believed was related to your childhood condition, a condition that never existed. The doctors need to know about your actual medical background to properly treat Noah." He sank onto a nearby bench, suddenly deflated. "He's going to be okay. The doctors say it's a small defect, easily corrected with minimally invasive surgery." "I'm relieved to hear that." I sat beside him, careful to maintain some distance. "But that doesn't change the fact that you've been lying to your wife, to her family, perhaps to yourself for years." "What was I supposed to do?" he asked bitterly. "Tell Olivia I was abandoned as a baby? That my real parents threw me away like garbage? That I have no idea where I come from, what diseases might run in my family? Nothing." The raw pain in his voice cut through my anger. This wasn't just about deception or manipulation. This was about the wounded child who had never fully healed, the abandoned baby who had grown into a man still desperately seeking validation and security. You were supposed to trust that she loved you enough to accept all of you, James, including your past. He laughed hollowly. You don't know Olivia's family. They research potential spouses like corporations vetting acquisition targets. They wanted someone with the right background, the right pedigree, the right genetic profile for producing heirs. If they'd known I was adopted, they would have pressured her to find someone else. Then that would have been their loss, I said, firmly. And if Olivia had given in to that pressure, she wouldn't have deserved you anyway. He glanced at me skeptically. That's easy for you to say. You didn't have to face their judgment, their constant evaluation. No, I just had to face being dismissed as the cleaning lady, as someone too uneducated and unsophisticated to care for her own grandson. He had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. That wasn't my idea. That was Regina and Olivia. But you didn't. Contradict them. You didn't defend me. You suggested I scrub floors at an assisted living facility to earn my keep. I was trying to be practical. No, James, you were being cruel. We sat in silence for a moment. The weight of months, perhaps years, of unspoken truths hanging between us. How did you find me? I asked finally. He shifted uncomfortably. I followed Olivia after she left to meet you. I was suspicious. She's been acting strange since your bank stunt. I saw the two of you at the Gardenia, waited outside until you left, then followed you here. He glanced around again, taking in the obvious value of the brownstone. Which brings me back to my original question. Where did all this come from? Did you have money stashed away all this time? I considered how much to reveal. James was already reeling from the confrontation about his lies. Learning about my substantial inheritance might further complicate an already volatile situation. Yet, continuing to withhold the truth would only perpetuate the pattern of secrets and half-truths that had damaged our relationship. If we were ever to rebuild trust, if that was even possible, honesty had to begin now. I recently received an inheritance, I said simply, from a former patient named Harold Abernathy. He had no family and left his estate to me in appreciation for the care I provided during his final months. James's eyes narrowed suspiciously. How much of an inheritance are we talking about? The brownstone, which is worth approximately $2 million, and financial assets of around $4.5 million. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally, something like betrayal. $6.5 million? You've been sitting on $6.5 million while we struggled to make mortgage payments? While we worried about how to afford Noah's medical care? What kind of mother does that? The kind whose son told her she was a financial burden. The kind who was told she wasn't welcome in her son's home unless she contributed financially. The kind who discovered her severance pay had been diverted without her knowledge or consent. He flushed darkly. That was a mistake. I was going to tell you. When? After you'd spent it? I was protecting it for you. James, please. We both know that's not true. He stood abruptly, pacing again. So, this is your revenge? Living in luxury, while letting us think you were destitute? Watching us scramble to cover bills while you had millions in the bank? This isn't about revenge. It's about finally prioritizing my own well-being after decades of putting everyone else first. It's about recognizing that I deserve dignity and respect, not to be treated as a financial resource to be exploited when convenient and discarded when not. So what now? He demanded. You just cut us off? Live your millionaire lifestyle while your grandson needs expensive medical care? It was a low blow, using Noah as emotional leverage, but not entirely unexpected. James had always been skilled at finding and exploiting vulnerabilities. I have no intention of abandoning Noah, I said firmly. I've already discussed with Olivia how I can help with his medical expenses. But my support will come with boundaries and expectations of respect, James. My days of unconditional financial sacrifice are over. James stared at me. his expression hardening into something I barely recognized. Boundaries and expectations, he repeated coldly. So now your own family has to earn your help? What happened to unconditional love? Love is unconditional, James. Financial support is not, especially when that support is neither appreciated nor respected. You're talking like some kind of self-help book. This isn't you, Mom. The expensive clothes, the fancy house, the cold calculations. This isn't who you are. I considered his words carefully. Was he right? Had my transformation been more than external? Had the inheritance changed me fundamentally? No, I realized. It hadn't changed who I was. It had revealed who I'd always been beneath the sacrifices and compromises. A woman with dignity, with self-respect, with boundaries. You're right that I've changed, I said finally. But not in the way you think. The difference is that I now value myself as much as I've always valued you. He scoffed, turning away to examine a nearby bookshelf. So, what was your plan? To hide out here in your mansion, counting your millions, while letting us think you were struggling? How long would you have kept this secret if Olivia hadn't tracked you down? I told you I would contact you after 2 weeks. That was our agreement. And then what? You'd show up looking like this. He gestured at my transformed appearance. Announce you're secretly wealthy and expect us to just accept it? To not be hurt that you kept something this massive from us? His hypocrisy was breathtaking. That's rich coming from someone who hid his adoption from his own wife, who invented a fictional medical history that could have endangered his son. That's different. How? How is it different, James? Because it was your secret to keep? Because your reasons felt justified to you? I was protecting my family. My relationship with Olivia, my standing with her parents. And I was protecting myself, I interrupted. From exactly this kind of entitled reaction. From having my resources demanded as a right rather than requested with respect. He turned back to me, his face flushing. Entitled? After everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, James? I provided the down payment for your home. I helped fund your wedding. I offered childcare that was rejected because I wasn't deemed qualified. I've given, and when I finally needed support, you suggested I scrub floors to earn my keep. You're twisting everything. You're my mother. Of course I expected you to help me. That's what parents do. And children grow up to honor and respect their parents, to support them when they're in need. What part of your behavior these past few weeks reflects that value? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite my anger. This isn't getting us anywhere. The fact remains that you're sitting on millions while we're struggling with Noah's medical bills. I've already told you I'll help with Noah's care. But my support will be directed through proper channels. A trust for his medical needs, perhaps, managed by a professional trustee. You don't trust us with the money, he said flatly. Given that you diverted my severance check without permission? No, I don't. The doorbell rang, interrupting our increasingly heated exchange. I checked the security monitor to see Olivia standing on the porch, Noah in his carrier beside her. It's your wife, I told James, moving to open the door. Olivia entered, her expression tight with barely contained emotion. She took in the scene, James and me facing each other in obvious conflict, and sighed deeply. I should have known you'd follow me, she said to James. I told you I needed time to process everything before we talked. Process what? My mother's betrayal? Her secret millions? Olivia set Noah's carrier down carefully and turned to face her husband. No, James. Your betrayal. Your lies. The fact that our entire marriage is built on fiction. Don't be dramatic. I didn't tell you I was adopted. It's hardly a criminal offense. You didn't just omit information, Olivia countered, her voice steady but intense. You created an elaborate fiction about childhood surgeries. You falsified medical history forms that doctors are using to treat our son. You involved my father in your lies, having him consult specialists about a condition you never had. James's face darkened. I had to. Your family would never have accepted me otherwise. You know how obsessed they are with bloodlines and pedigrees? That's not true, Olivia said quietly. Yes, my parents can be elitist and judgmental. But they're not monsters, James. They wouldn't have rejected you for being adopted. Of course they would have. They barely accepted me as it was. Your mother still introduces me as Olivia's husband, rather than by my name half the time. Olivia's expression softened slightly. That's just Mom being Mom. It has nothing to do with your background. Easy for you to say. You've never had to prove your worth to anyone. You were born with the right name, the right connections, everything handed to you. I watched this exchange with growing clarity. James's lies, his desperate need for approval from Olivia's family, his fixation on status and appearance, it all stemmed from the same deep-seated insecurity. The abandoned baby had grown into a man still seeking proof of his inherent worth, still trying to earn the acceptance his biological parents had denied him. James, I said gently, being adopted doesn't make you less worthy. It never has. Says the woman who kept her millions secret while watching us struggle, he snapped. If you really believed that, you would have shared your windfall immediately. I was going to, I admitted. That was my original plan, to help you and Olivia, to invest in your business, to secure Noah's future. But then I saw how quickly you turned on me when you thought I had nothing left to give. How disposable I became the moment I needed support rather than offering it. That's not fair, James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Olivia stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. Patricia's right, James. The way we treated her when she lost her job was shameful, especially after everything she's done. For us. Oh, so now you're on her side? After one heart-to-heart over tea, suddenly my mother's your new best friend? This isn't about sides, Olivia replied. It's about acknowledging the truth. We, all of us, have made mistakes. We've hurt each other. The question is whether we can move forward with honesty and respect. Noah began to fuss in his carrier, perhaps sensing the tension in the room. Olivia bent to lift him, cradling him against her shoulder with practiced ease. The sight of my grandson, innocent, vulnerable, untouched by the complicated adult emotions swirling around him, brought a lump to my throat. May I? I asked, holding out my arms. Olivia hesitated only briefly before transferring Noah to me. He settled against my chest, his warm weight familiar and profound. I breathed in his baby scent, stroked his downy hair, and felt the simple, uncomplicated love that only a child can inspire. He needs all of us, I said softly. Not just our financial support, but our emotional stability, our example of how to resolve conflicts with dignity and respect. James watched us, his anger visibly deflating. So what does that look like, practically speaking? It was a legitimate question. After all that had happened, all that had been revealed, how could we possibly rebuild trust and relationship? It starts with honesty, I said. Complete honesty, from all of us. No more secrets, no more manipulations. And then we establish clear boundaries. I'll help with Noah's medical expenses, set up trust for his education and future needs. I'm willing to consider investing in your business, James, but through proper legal channels with appropriate oversight. You still don't trust me, he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Trust has to be rebuilt, I replied gently. On all sides. I need to know that you value me as your mother, not just as a financial resource. You need to know that I won't use my newfound wealth as leverage or control, Olivia nodded slowly. That seems fair. And I think we, James and I, need to have some difficult conversations of our own. She glanced at her husband. About honesty, about our marriage, about what we want for Noah's future. James looked between us, clearly feeling outnumbered. So that's it? You two have it all figured out? The new power dynamic? The new rules? No, I said firmly. This isn't about power, James. It's about respect. Mutual respect. Something that's been missing from our family dynamics for too long. And if I don't agree to your terms? They're not terms. They're boundaries. And they're non-negotiable. Not because I'm trying to control you, but because I finally understand that I deserve basic dignity and respect. Just as you do. Just as Olivia does. Just as Noah does. He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached for Noah, taking him carefully from my arms. The tenderness with which he held his son, the protective curve of his body, the gentle support of the baby's head, reminded me powerfully of how I had once held him. I don't know if I can do this, he said finally, his voice low. The honesty, the boundaries, the new, whatever this is, I don't know if I know how. It was perhaps the most honest thing James had said in years. Not a deflection, not a manipulation, but a genuine admission of uncertainty and vulnerability. None of us do, I admitted. We're all figuring it out as we go, but I think we owe it to Noah to try. Olivia moved to stand beside her husband, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, the other gently stroking Noah's cheek. I agree. Whatever happens between us, James, Noah deserves parents who respect each other, who communicate honestly, who model integrity. The three of us stood there in the elegant foyer of my new home, the weight of revelations and confrontations heavy in the air. There were no easy answers, no quick resolutions to the complex web of hurts and betrayals that had brought us to this point. But as I watched James cradle his son, as I noted the tentative detente between him and Olivia, I felt a cautious hope stir within me. Not for an immediate reconciliation, too much had been revealed for that, but for the possibility of a new beginning, a relationship built on truth rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I'd like to help with Noah's medical care, I said into the silence. Not as a blank check, but as his grandmother who loves him beyond measure, who wants nothing more than to see him healthy and thriving. James nodded slowly, his eyes on his son rather than me. I suppose that's where we start then, with Noah. Wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even acceptance, but it was acknowledgement, however reluctant, that we needed to find a path forward. For Noah's sake, if nothing else, and perhaps, in time, for our own. The tentative truce established in my foyer didn't last long. 3 days later, I received a call from Martin Brewster, Harold's attorney, his normally calm voice tight with concern. Patricia, have you seen the Westlake Observer this morning? No. Why? There's an article about you, about your inheritance from Harold. It's problematic. I immediately pulled up the newspaper's website on my tablet. There it was, prominently featured in the local news section. Former hospital employee inherits millions from wealthy patient. Ethical questions raised. The article, written by a journalist I'd never heard of, quoted anonymous sources close to the family, expressing concern about the appropriateness of a healthcare worker accepting such a large bequest from a vulnerable patient. It hinted at potential coercion or undue influence, questioning whether Harold had been of sound mind when making his will. Most disturbingly, it revealed private details about my relationship with James, describing our recent estrangement and suggesting it was connected to my sudden wealth. It even mentioned Noah's medical condition, though thankfully not by name, referring only to health challenges requiring expensive specialized care. This is outrageous, I told Martin, my hands shaking with anger. These are private family matters, and the insinuations about Harold's bequest are completely unfounded. I agree, Martin said grimly. The implications are defamatory. I've already contacted the paper's legal department demanding an immediate retraction and apology. Who would do this? I wondered aloud, though I already suspected the answer. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Regina. Just saw the Observer. So the cleaning lady struck gold. Don't think this ends well for you. Another text followed almost immediately, this one from a former colleague at the hospital. Everyone's talking about the article. Administration is considering an internal investigation into patient staff gift policies. What's going on, Patricia? Then, a call from my new next-door neighbor, expressing concern about all this unpleasant publicity affecting property values in our historic district. Within hours, what had been a private family matter had exploded into a public spectacle. My phone continued buzzing with messages from former colleagues, acquaintances, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had questions, opinions, thinly veiled judgments. By mid-afternoon, a local TV news van was parked outside, the brownstone, a reporter attempting to get a statement about the controversial inheritance. I remained inside, blinds drawn, declining all requests for comment as Martin had advised. Around 6, Olivia called. I just wanted you to know I had nothing to do with this, she said immediately. Neither did James. Do you know who did? She sighed heavily. I have my suspicions. My mother was furious when I told her about your inheritance, about our plan to accept your help with Noah's medical expenses. She said you were manipulating us, that no nurse legitimately inherits millions from a patient, that there must be something improper about the whole situation. And you think she contacted the newspaper? She has connections there, and the article certainly reflects her perspective. I closed my eyes briefly, weariness washing over me. Regina had always been coldly calculating, but this level of malicious interference was shocking even for her. What does James say about all this? He's conflicted. Part of him is angry about the invasion of privacy, especially the mentions of Noah. But another part agrees with Regina's assessment. I finished for her. I think he's struggling with a lot of complicated feelings right now. About the adoption revelations, about your inheritance, about everything that's happened. That was undoubtedly true, but it did little to mitigate the harm being done by this public exposure. My reputation, Harold's memory, even Noah's privacy, all were being sacrificed on the altar of Regina's vindictiveness and James's inability to defend his own mother. What happens now? Olivia asked, her voice small. Now, I said, my resolve hardening. I fight back. Not just for myself, but for Harold's legacy. And for Noah's right to privacy and dignity. The private family matter had become inescapably public, and I would no longer remain silent while others controlled the narrative of my life. That evening, I sat in Harold's study, my study, formulating a plan. The familiar room with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs had become my sanctuary, a place to think clearly away from the chaos that now surrounded me. On my desk lay Harold's leather-bound journal, which I had finally begun reading. His elegant handwriting filled the pages with reflections on life, legacy, and the nature of dignity. One passage in particular resonated deeply. True wealth is not measured in dollars, but in integrity, in the courage to stand for what is right, even when it costs you. Money can be a shield or a weapon. The choice of how to wield it reflects one's character more profoundly than the mere fact of possessing it. Harold had faced public scrutiny himself during his distinguished academic career. His controversial stances on educational reform had made him enemies, subjected him to criticism in academic journals and local media. Yet he had never wavered in his convictions nor compromised his principles. I needed to follow his example, not with anger or vindictiveness, but with measured, strategic actions that would protect what mattered most. First, I called Thomas Chen at Meridian Bank. I need to establish 3 trusts immediately, I told him. One for Noah's medical care, one for his education, and one for ongoing housing security. That can be arranged, Thomas replied. Would you like these to be revocable or irrevocable? Trusts? Irrevocable, I said firmly. And I want them structured so that neither James nor Olivia has direct access to the funds. Payments should go directly to medical providers, educational institutions, and property management. I understand, and the trustees? Professional fiduciaries only, no family members. Next, I contacted Martin. I want to make a public statement addressing the newspaper article, I told him. Not defensively, but with dignity and clarity. Are you sure that's wise? He cautioned. Sometimes engaging with defamatory content only amplifies it. I'm not engaging with the defamation. I'm honoring Harold's memory by speaking truth about our relationship and his legacy. Martin paused. Harold would approve, I think. He never shied away from setting the record straight. Exactly. Can you arrange a small press conference? Nothing elaborate, just a brief statement with no questions. I'll make the arrangements. And what about Regina? Do you want to pursue any legal action regarding her role in this? I considered this carefully. Regina's interference was malicious, designed to damage my reputation and undermine my relationship with James and Olivia. Legal action might be justified, but it would also escalate the conflict, dragging Noah's name further into public view. No, I decided. No legal action against Regina specifically, but I do want to send a clear message. My final call was to Dr. Elizabeth Winters, the hospital's ethics committee chair and a former colleague I deeply respected. I explained the situation frankly, including the circumstances of Harold's bequest and the current media speculation, the Chi. Hospitals shouldn't be blindsided by this, Elizabeth. I wanted you to hear the truth directly from me. I appreciate that, Patricia. And for what it's worth, I never doubted your integrity for a moment. With these foundational pieces in place, I turned to crafting the most challenging communication of all, a letter to James. Not a text, not an email, but a handwritten letter conveying the final boundaries I would establish going forward. It was time to break the cycle of manipulation and exploitation once and for all, to create a legacy of integrity that would benefit Noah long after the current storm had passed. The press conference was held in the elegant conference room of Martin's law office the following morning. Despite the short notice, several local reporters attended, along with a representative from the hospital's public relations department. I wore a simple but elegant navy suit, professional, dignified, without ostentation. Martin introduced me briefly, then stepped aside as I approached. The podium. The cameras flashed, momentarily blinding me, but I kept my focus on the prepared statement in front of me. Good morning. My name is Patricia Davis. Until recently, I worked as a pediatric nurse at Westlake Memorial Hospital, providing care to children and their families for nearly 30 years. During the final months of his life, I was privileged to care for Dr. Harold Abernathy, a distinguished professor and longtime member of our community. Dr. Abernathy and I developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. He was a man of extraordinary intellect and kindness, who faced his terminal diagnosis with remarkable dignity. In his final act of generosity, he chose to leave his estate to me, a decision made with full mental capacity, verified by independent medical and legal experts, and executed with proper procedural safeguards. I am deeply troubled by recent insinuations regarding the propriety of this bequest. These allegations dishonor Dr. Abernathy's memory and his right to determine the distribution of his own assets. They also cast unfounded aspersions on my professional ethics and personal integrity. Let me be clear. Throughout my nursing career, I have maintained the highest ethical standards. The hospital's ethics committee is welcome to review all aspects of my professional relationship with Dr. Abernathy. I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Regarding my family's private matters, which have been inappropriately dragged into public view, I will be establishing 3 irrevocable trusts to benefit my grandson's medical care, education, and future security. These trusts will be managed by professional fiduciaries to ensure the funds are used appropriately for their intended purposes. I am not seeking publicity or public validation. My only desire is to honor Dr. Abernathy's wishes, to support my grandson's well-being, and to live the remainder of my life with the dignity that every human being deserves. I will not be taking questions. Thank you for your time. As I stepped away from the podium, the room erupted with questions and camera flashes. But Martin quickly ended the conference, escorting me to a private office where we could monitor the initial media response. "Well done," he said approvingly. "Clear, dignified, and focused on the facts without becoming defensive. Harold would have approved." The first online reports appeared within the hour, most adopting a notably different tone from the original. Accusatory article. Former nurse defends inheritance, announces charitable trusts for grandson's care. Read one headline. Hospital Ethics Committee Chair. Supports Davis, questions source of allegations, stated another. Elizabeth had evidently made a statement of her own, defending my professional reputation and confirming that the hospital had no concerns about the appropriateness of Harold's bequest. By mid-afternoon, the tide of public opinion had visibly shifted. Social media comments expressed support for my dignity under pressure and criticism for the obvious hit job of the original article. Several of my former nursing colleagues had given interviews praising my character and professionalism. Most satisfyingly, the Westlake Observer published a formal retraction and apology, acknowledging that certain allegations in their original story could not be substantiated, and apologizing for any distress caused to Ms. Davis or the memory of Dr. Abernathy. The newspaper didn't identify their source, but they didn't need. Regina's attempt to destroy my reputation had backfired spectacularly, exposing her own vindictiveness instead. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Just saw your statement. Impressive. We should talk." Then, moments later, a message from an unexpected source. James. "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything." The weeks following the press conference brought significant changes. The 3 trusts for Noah were established, providing financial security for his medical care, education, and future housing needs. I was careful to structure them so that neither James nor Olivia could access the funds directly, a precaution that still felt necessary despite our tentative steps toward reconciliation. Regina's social standing, by contrast, suffered a noticeable decline. While the newspaper hadn't named her as their source, the connection wasn't difficult to make. Several of her society friends quietly distanced themselves, uncomfortable with her vindictive attack on a grandmother advocating for her grandson's medical care. Even her husband, typically silent on family matters, publicly expressed support for the trusts I had established for Noah, effectively contradicting his wife's accusations. 2 weeks after the press conference, Olivia invited me to lunch at a small, quiet restaurant far from prying eyes. She arrived alone, having arranged for Noah to stay with a professional caregiver. "I wanted to talk privately," she explained after we'd ordered, "about everything that's happened, and about where we go from here." She looked tired but composed, a certain new maturity evident in her demeanor. The entitled young woman who had dismissed me as unqualified to care for her child seemed to have been replaced by someone more thoughtful, more grounded. "James and I have been in counseling," she continued, "trying to process his lies about the adoption, my family's influence, on our relationship, all of it. It's been difficult." "I can imagine," I said gently. "These are fundamental issues." She nodded, fidgeting with her napkin. "The thing is, I'm not sure our marriage will survive this. Not because of the adoption itself. I don't care about that. But because of the deception. The willingness to lie about something so important, even when it affected Noah's medical care. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want James to lose his family. We're taking it day by day, she said with a small shrug. The counselor thinks James needs individual therapy to address his abandonment issues properly. He's resistant, but I've made it a condition of continuing our marriage. And your mother? How has she reacted to all this? Olivia's expression hardened. We're not speaking at the moment. After your press conference, when the media tide turned, she tried to convince me to issue a statement supporting her version of events. When I refused, she accused me of betraying the family. I'm sorry, I said again. That's a difficult position to be in. It's clarifying, actually, Olivia replied. I've spent my entire life trying to meet her impossible standards. Maybe it's time I set some standards of my own. We shifted to discussing Noah, whose cardiac procedure was scheduled for the following month. The specialists were optimistic, predicting a full recovery with minimal follow-up care required. The trust you established will cover everything, Olivia said. It's more than generous. It's what any grandmother would do if she could, I replied. She studied me thoughtfully. Not every grandmother, certainly not my mother. As our lunch concluded, Olivia hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind throughout our meeting. Where do you and James go from here? He told me about his text to you that you haven't responded yet. It was true. James's simple, I'm sorry, had left me uncertain. After all that had happened, all that had been revealed, could a single text message be the foundation for rebuilding our relationship? I'm still processing, I admitted. Part of me wants to embrace him immediately, to pretend none of this happened. But another part knows that wouldn't be healthy for either of us. What will it take? For you to forgive him? I considered the question carefully. Not just words, actions. Consistent actions that demonstrate respect, honesty, and recognition of boundaries. And time. It will take time. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. He wants to see you, to apologize in person. Would you be open to that? I took a deep breath, weighing my response. Yes, I said finally. Yes, I would. 6 months passed, then a year. Noah's surgery was successful, his recovery swift and uncomplicated. The medical trust I'd established proved its value, covering not just the procedure itself, but also follow-up care, medications, and specialized developmental support to ensure the brief cardiac issues didn't impact his growth. James and Olivia's marriage survived, albeit transformed. The counseling continued, eventually joined by individual therapy for James to address his deep-seated abandonment issues. Slowly, painfully, he began to confront the complicated emotions surrounding his adoption, not just the fact of it, but his lifelong response to it. Our own relationship evolved cautiously. After our first face-to-face meeting post-confrontation, a difficult, emotionally raw conversation in which James's apology seemed genuine if still incomplete, we established a careful routine. Sunday brunches every other week. Occasional weekday visits when his work schedule allowed. Always in public places at first, then gradually at my home, and eventually at theirs. Regina remained estranged from both her daughter and me, her pride, preventing any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Her husband, however, quietly established his own relationship with Noah, sometimes bringing him to visit me when Olivia had appointments. These unexpected grandfather-grandmother partnerships became a strange but welcome development, a silver lining in the cloud of family conflict. The brownstone became my true home during this time. I redecorated several rooms, maintaining Harold's elegant aesthetic while incorporating touches that reflected my own tastes. The third-floor sunroom became my favorite retreat, filled with plants and comfortable seating, a perfect place to read or simply watch the changing seasons across the city skyline. I developed new routines, new interests, a watercolor class at the community center, volunteer work at a children's literacy program, occasional travel, modest trips at first, then more ambitious journeys as my confidence grew. Through it all, Harold's journal remained my touchstone, its wisdom guiding me through unfamiliar terrain. On Noah's second birthday, I hosted a small celebration at the brownstone. James and Olivia attended, as did a few carefully selected friends. Regina was notably absent, having declined the invitation with a terse note about prior commitments. As I watched Noah toddle around the garden, his face alight with joy, James approached and sat beside me on the stone bench. "He looks so much like you did at that age," I said, a bittersweet memory surfacing. James was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that. About how you chose me, raised me, loved me, even though we don't share DNA. You were always my son," I said simply. "From the first moment I held you." "I know that now," he replied. "It took me too long to understand what that really meant." In the dappled sunlight of that autumn afternoon, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly. That had been a gradual process over months of cautious reconnection. But something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. Acceptance of our shared past with all its complexities and contradictions. "I've never asked," James said hesitantly. "What was it like, the day you adopted me?" It was a question he had never posed in all his 30 years. A door opening to conversations we had never had, to truths long obscured by silence and resentment. "It was the most terrifying, exhilarating day of my life," I began, memories flooding back with surprising clarity. "You were so tiny, so vulnerable, but your eyes, they were old somehow, wise beyond your months. As if you'd already seen too much of life's hardships." James listened intently, his expression open in a way it hadn't been since his childhood. For the first time in decades, we were truly seeing each other, not through the distorted lens of expectation or obligation, but as we really were. Two imperfect people bound by choice rather than biology, by love rather than duty. Noah toddled over, breaking the moment with his infectious laughter, demanding to be lifted into his father's arms. James complied, his face softening as he held his son close. "We'll do better with him," he said quietly. "Break the cycles. Build something healthier." "Yes," I agreed. "We will." 5 years after I was kicked out of my son's house, I celebrated my 61st birthday in the garden of my brownstone. Noah, now 6 and thriving, helped me blow out the candles on a cake he had supervised Olivia in baking. James, more relaxed and authentic than I could remember seeing him in decades, documented the moment with photographs. A small gathering of genuine friends, some from my nursing days, others new connections made since my life's transformation, surrounded us with warmth and laughter. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, I sat alone in Harold's study, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment of contentment. The inheritance that had initially seemed like my salvation had indeed changed my life, but not in the ways I had initially imagined. The true value of Harold's gift wasn't the financial security, though that had certainly granted me freedom and choices I'd never before experienced. The real gift was the opportunity to rediscover myself, to excavate the woman who had been buried beneath decades of sacrifice and accommodation. I opened Harold's journal to a passage I had read countless times over the years. "We honor those we love not by diminishing ourselves, but by living with integrity and purpose. True generosity flows from abundance, not deprivation." How right he had been. My decades of self-sacrifice hadn't ultimately served James well. By allowing myself to be treated as a resource rather than a person deserving of respect, I had enabled patterns that damaged us both. The painful rupture between us, his callous dismissal, My necessary boundary setting had eventually led to healing neither of us could have achieved otherwise. James had been forced to confront his deepest insecurities and the lies they had generated. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. Noah would grow up in a healthier family system as a result. He would see his father in therapy, working to break generational patterns. He would witness his grandmother standing firmly in her worth while remaining generous from choice rather than obligation. The greatest wisdom I had gained was simple yet profound. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's abdication. True. Love holds space for both connection and separation, for both giving and receiving, for both sacrifice and self-preservation. As I watched the sunset paint the garden in golden light, I felt a deep gratitude wash over me, not just for Harold's generosity or the material comfort it had provided, but for the painful awakening that had ultimately led me home to myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.